In the last third of the 19th century, esoteric traditions from both the East and the West were gaining greater popularity due to the efforts of a small group of individuals. Calling themselves theosophists, they claimed no personal credit for the teachings they shared, but insisted instead that they came from a group of highly evolved souls attempting to help those in search of the spiritual. These larger-than-life beings were known as the Mahatmas.
Mahatmas, great souls, wise people. Certainly there's a long tradition in India, and in fact in China and other Eastern countries, of wise individuals who were great teachers.
There must surely be individuals in our humanity who have achieved a great deal more than the majority of people in the human race. If we look around and at just people we know, people we come in contact with, we will notice that there is a vast range of development in people. It doesn't have anything to do with their human worth, but it has to do with their ability. Some people are artistic geniuses, others are intellectual giants. Some can't think much at all, others can't paint. So there's various degrees of development. But if one accepts the possibility, even the likelihood, that consciousness survives bodily death and that there is a process of reincarnation, then it would become a logical necessity that there would be individuals such as the adepts, individuals who'd gone further, who had learned more, who had developed more, and to whom we might look up as elder brothers.
It was a fiery Russian woman and student of the ancient wisdom tradition, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, who introduced the Mahatmas to the Western world.
From early childhood, H.P. Blavatsky reports that she had psychic visions of a tall Indian man, and she felt that he was her protector. She doesn't say too much about it except that, I think. But in 1851, she was in London, and in that year they had what they called the Great Exhibition. It was a sort of World's Fair, and it was a really big event. And she was present, and there were, of course, delegates from the various colonies in the British Empire, and among those delegations there was a delegation from Nepal. And as the delegation from Nepal was going by in Hyde Park, she saw in the flesh the very man she had seen in psychic visions as a child. You can imagine how she must have felt. And she rushed out to him, and he stopped her. So she stepped back. But the fact is, the next day she did meet Moria, most likely in Hyde Park. And they had a conversation about what she might do to help him and others to spread some of their ideas and their knowledge into the West.
For example, while she was told to form such an organization as the Theosophical Society, and she had attempted an early organization in Egypt, she was never told the specifics. She herself has said she was given the broad general outlines of a society that would be devoted to the ideal of human brotherhood, that would bring into the world the teachings that would aid humanity in its onward progress.
While Madame Blavatsky stood as the key force behind the Mahatmas and the Theosophical Society, much of the information given to us directly by the Mahatmas is purported to have come in letters that mysteriously appeared to other individuals. The first known letter was written in November of 1870 and is currently in the archives of the Theosophical Society's international headquarters at Adyar, Chennai, India. Written in French, it was sent to Blavatsky's aunt, Madame Fadif, who lived in the Russian city of Odessa. Blavatsky had been traveling to remote areas of the world for many years, and at the time of the letter's writing was in India, or perhaps even the outer regions of Tibet, pursuing her occult studies. Her family had no idea of her whereabouts.
Madame Fadif wrote, "We were ready to believe her, that is HPB, dead, when I received a letter from him whom I believe you call Kutumi, which was brought to me in my house by a messenger of Asiatic appearance, who then disappeared before my very eyes." Now, the letter itself states, "The noble relations of Madame H. Blavatsky have no cause whatsoever for grief." I'm reading, obviously, the English translation. You can read the French. "Their daughter and niece has not left this world at all. She is living and desires to make known to those whom she loves that she is well and quite happy in the distant and unknown retreat which she has selected for herself." After she met Colonel Olcott, and the story is, of course, part of the history of the Theosophical Society, and they were in New York, and at the time of the founding of the society, he received letters from another branch known as the Brotherhood of Luxor.
Also known as the Egyptian Brotherhood, the distinctive feature of their letters was that they were written on a kind of black paper, and like most all of the Mahatma letters, contained various occult symbols which identified the particular group. These early letters can be found in C. Jinnarajadasa's book, Letters from the Masters of the Wisdom, and are reported to have been in connection with this group's interest in the formation of the Theosophical Society.
The chief of the Egyptian Brotherhood is said to be the adept who called himself Serapis Bey, and associated with him were others, among whom was Tuitit Bey, referred to several times by HPB. And this is the first page of the letter from this section, which begins, "Brother Neophyte, we greet thee. He who seeks us finds us. Try." And that word try appeared again and again and again in these early letters to Colonel Olcott.
The letters, however, most commonly referred to when talking about the Mahatma letters are those reported to have come from two individuals claiming membership in a fraternity of adepts known as the Tibetan Brotherhood, commonly referred to by the initials M and KH. Their names were Moria and Kutumi. The bulk of their letters are currently housed in London's British Library. Initially, however, the letters ended up in the hands of London's British Museum.
When those letters were offered to the British Museum, they said they would accept them only on certain conditions. First, they had an interest in them because the Theosophical Society in India made a very big impression, and also around the world at the time. And of course, the British were then in, India was then a colony of the United Kingdom. And they said they would accept them, first because they were of historical interest. Second, they wanted to find out whether or not H.P. Blavatsky had written those letters, because she had been charged with forging the letters. And they said, we must see those letters, and we must have samples of H.P. Blavatsky's handwriting and have our own handwriting experts check them and determine whether or not Blavatsky wrote them, and if she did, we don't want them. They did so, and they were quite certain that Blavatsky could not have written those letters. They didn't say adepts wrote them, but they said she didn't, so they took them. The third reason they took them was that they could not explain this phenomenon of the ink embedded in the paper. To this day, no one can explain how that was done.
Additional information on these mysterious letters can be found in Geoffrey Barborka's book, The Mahatmas and Their Letters. Barborca's extensive research on the letters includes detailed information of the purported paranormal events associated with their manufacture. For example, it was reported that the Mahatmas often enlisted the help of a key student, or chela, in the precipitation of their letters by a method that Madame Blavatsky described as psychological telegraphy. According to Blavatsky, a kind of electromagnetic connection is said to exist at the psychological level between the Mahatma and the chela. When the Mahatma wants a letter to be written, he signals the chela selected and directs his thoughts mentally in the form of words. With hands resting on a specially treated piece of paper, the chela acts as a kind of conscious channel through which the message can be transferred to the paper.
This is not an unusual sort of thing. Here are some notes. Would you write? And you're in close, almost rapport with the thinking. You know that person, and so you try to put it in the language that person would use. And that's why I say this is a kind of analogy. It's analogous to the process that I think the Mahatmas used at times with their chelas. They would impress an idea on the mind of the chela. This is what I want said. And leave it to the chela, or the pupil, disciple, however you want to call it. Chela was the technical term, but the pupil, to compose the letter. Now, obviously, mistakes could creep in because the chela might think, well, I think that idea ought to be modified, or I think it ought to be altered in some way to make more sense. And so mistakes could easily creep in. But that's what is meant by a psychological telegraphy, that it's the transmittal of mind to mind. And people who live very closely together, for example, husband and wife, very often pick up the idea in the mind of the other without having to have it said. Good friends do this. So it's not an unusual kind of occurrence.
According to Barborca, there are two possible ways in which the message reaches the paper. It is either impressed into or precipitated onto the paper. Barborca cites one portion of a Mahatma letter received in December of 1880, in which Kutumi refers to the production of his letters. The section reads, "Bear in mind that these, my letters, are not written, but impressed or precipitated, and then all mistakes corrected." The question arises as to whether the words impressed or precipitated are intended as synonyms of the same process, or refer to two entirely different processes. Barborca suggests the latter of these two possibilities. For Barborca, impressed letters convey the appearance of being embedded inside the paper. Precipitated letters, on the other hand, while similar in general appearance to that of impressed letters, are quite different when viewed in detail. Here, unlike a normal writing stroke with pen or pencil, every letter of every word of a precipitated letter is made up of a series of very small diagonal strokes that appear to be on top of rather than inside the paper. Barborca also reports that when a mistake in the psychic transmission did occur, say for example with an impressed letter, it was corrected, so to speak, by psychically lifting it out of the paper. However, because the impression of the script was embedded in the paper, a smudge is left where the word had been situated. Finally, the correct word or sentence was placed upon the smudged area. The correction, however, still gives the appearance of being embedded in the paper. While some feel that Barborca overanalyzes and points to distinctions that are hard to verify, skeptical scholars are still hard-pressed to suggest how these letters could have been written in any normal fashion. The majority of letters from Morya and Kutumi, whether produced independently or with the help of a chela, were addressed to Alfred Percy Sinnett, an English newspaper editor in India.
HPB and the colonel, of course, left the United States, went to India, arriving there in 1879, and Mr. Sinnett was interested in spiritualistic phenomena as the editor of one of the most influential newspapers in India, he was aware of the arrival in Bombay of these two very interesting people, the Russian and American, Blavatsky and Alcott, and wrote to them that he would be interested in meeting them, and of course invites them to come to visit him in Allahabad and then in Simla, where the British had their summer residence. So here was a man who commanded respect in what was known as the Anglo-Indian community, and who could write. And he, on many occasions, was even instructed in the letters to write up these episodes or write about it and publish it, and to indicate that there is this wisdom tradition. There is more to be known than the science of that day or the general belief of that day. And because he was willing to ask questions, the Mahatma found him a useful conduit, if I can put it that way, a recipient of the letters, and a conduit for as much of the wisdom tradition as could be communicated at that particular time.
While the greatest amount of correspondence came from Kutumi, Mr. Sinnett received a smaller number of letters from Maurya. Considered to have been the adept most closely related to Madame Blavatsky, Maurya's handwriting was much different in style from that of his associate K.H. And unlike the characteristic blue color of K.H.'s handwriting, Maurya's letters appeared to be written in red ink.
There aren't many letters from the Master Maurya. He nearly always wrote in red ink or red pencil. However, analysis does indicate, if you want to see the letters, that the letters or signatures were in about 15 different colors. When HPB came to the United States, 1873, and she met Colonel Alcott, 1874, long in there in the founding of the society. This was a period when there was a lot of spiritualistic phenomena, some of it fraudulent, some part of it, I suppose, authentic, and HPB said, of course, phenomena can be produced. Well, of course, from the very beginning, there were those who, particularly in India, the Christian missionaries. We have to remember it was a time of great missionary activity, and naturally this sort of threatened the Christianization, if we can put it that way, of India, because here were these two people, Alcott and Blavatsky, and then Sinnett and many others rallying around them, who were pointing to the original traditions of India and saying, don't lose those, these are valuable. It's just as important to be a good Hindu as it is for us to be good Christians or whatever. And in the midst of all of this, the British Society of Psychical Research sends a man, Richard Hodgson, out to India to investigate. And some of the disgruntled former employees at the headquarters combine with the Christian missionaries in Madras to bring forth evidence, very slanted evidence, and in itself forged evidence in some cases, to suggest that HPB was a fraud, that these letters had indeed been written by her.
However, a longtime student of theosophy and member of the Theosophical Society, Virginia Hansen, did an exhaustive study of the circumstances behind the Mahatma letters. In her book, Masters and Men, she demonstrates that many letters were delivered when Madame Blavatsky was nowhere in the area, and under circumstances which she could not possibly have known their content. Probably the best example of this kind is the letter which was received by Annie Besant in 1900, 9 years after Blavatsky's death. And while some scholars currently cite the Hodgson report as proof that the Mahatma letters were forgeries, the Society for Psychical Research raised severe doubts about the report, and in 1986 finally published a new report declaring that Madame Blavatsky was unjustly condemned. The case was re-examined by Dr. Vernon Harrison, past president of the Royal Photographic Society and an expert on forgery. In addition to demonstrating that the Hodgson report was biased and disregarded evidence in Blavatsky's favor, Dr. Harrison also carried out his own detailed analysis of the letters in question. He noticed that Hodgson's strongest evidence rested on the assertion that certain peculiar aspects of Madame Blavatsky's writing appeared throughout the KH writing. For example, Hodgson looked at Blavatsky's formation of the letters A, D, G, O, and Q, and noticed that she often left a gap on the left side of the curved portion of these letters. Hodgson called this the left gap stroke, and cited it as strong evidence against Madame Blavatsky, since this same tendency appeared in the KH writing. Dr. Harrison shows, however, that the left gap stroke is not uniquely characteristic of Madame Blavatsky's handwriting. Other well-known persons exhibiting this writing stroke include Mark Twain and former President Dwight D. Eisenhower. These and other problems with Hodgson's analysis led Dr. Harrison to conclude, among other things, that the Hodgson report is riddled with downright falsity and that his case against Madame Blavatsky is not proven.
HPB, I'm sure it was difficult for her. These dreadful charges that were brought against her again and again. She was, and of course, she laid herself open to them, and that is the thing. She, and from one point of view, didn't care if she felt that phenomena might be useful. She would produce it. At other times, she would absolutely refuse. There were occasions when somebody would visit. Someone came out from England. I know on one occasion this medium, Eglinton, was there, and people expected her to produce something. She absolutely wouldn't. So it looked as though she was playing tricks at times. I think it was for the reason of testing the individual. Are you simply looking for phenomena, for the phenomenal, or are you seeking for the basis on which phenomena are produced? In the letters, particularly the letters to Sinnott, well, even in some of the others, but particularly in the letters to Sinnott, point out that a phenomena has a tendency to feed on itself, and that therefore this was not what they were after. They were interested in presenting ideas, principles, the esoteric philosophy.
The esoteric philosophy covers the evolutionary process from the formation of matter in the first place, the formation of the planetary system in which we live, and then the evolution of the kingdoms of nature, the becoming of man, what man is, and then it looks also at the future evolution of man, because we are by no means finished, so that the question of life after death, or rather life between lives, is also part of the province of the esoteric philosophy. The Mahatma letters report extensively on the question of life after death. We have first to consider what it means to be born, the taking on, as it were, of garments, vestures. The physical body is the most obvious one, but also other instruments or vehicles of consciousness for thinking and feeling and other types of experience. That is the process of being born. And so when it comes to dying, there is a gradual shedding of these vestures which have temporarily been used. So there is a withdrawal of consciousness from each one in turn. A study of the information given in the Mahatma letters does confirm the traditional view that death is by no means the end. It is a change in the focus of consciousness.
The death of the physical body is not death in the sense that the individual ceases to exist. He passes on to other worlds. He reaps the fruits of his actions here, and there is a period of long rest in a subtle world which is called Devachan, and then there is a return to a new incarnation. This teaching has been given in various religious traditions. There are descriptions, for example, in the Upanishad and Upanishadic commentaries, but it is the teaching is allegorical, symbolical, not easy to understand. Starting with the Mahatma letters, explanations have been given about the after-death state and what happens and rebirth and so on, which are put in simpler modern terms, and therefore they are very helpful. They discourage belief. They say clearly that they don't want a religion to be used as a crutch.
The Mahatmas, the authors of those letters, regarded themselves as followers of the Lord Buddha, and the Lord Buddha said nothing is to be accepted just because it is in a book that people think of as holy or because an authority has uttered it.
In so many religions, evil customs have grown and people automatically accept them. For example, the caste system in India, or the idea of the Christian missionary that he must save people at all costs through the Inquisition or whatever it is. All kinds of ideas come into existence in the religions. And the person who believes accepts everything. The Mahatmas want us to think for ourselves, investigate, and take a great deal of trouble to find out what is the truth.
And this attitude is summed up in a sentence by the president-founder, Colonel Olcott. At the inauguration of the Society in 1875, we seek, inquire, reject nothing without cause, accept nothing without proof. We are students, not teachers. And he declared most strongly that any suggestion of leaning upon an authority, even that of the Mahatmas, was to be deplored. Always, the sentence that comes to my mind is, "Be ye lamps unto yourselves." And I think that sums up the attitude of the Mahatmas. There is no question of blind faith or blind following.
Akasha is what I call the fabric of the universe. Now, its chief characteristic is sound. Everything is sound, resonates, vibration. Everything is interconnected. Now, this is the very basis of the theosophical worldview, that there is one ultimate reality. and then all of its permutations, all of it, the way in which it develops through universes, through every aspect of nature, vibrating through everything, rock, plant, tree, animal, ourselves, human beings, is this throbbing of the one life.
All the parts are integrally part of that one reality. If that is understood, it becomes easier for us to understand brotherhood in daily life.
All the way through, they indicate that a person has to find out for himself. The methods used are not fundamentally different from those of the sciences that we are accustomed to, that is, investigation, experimenting, proving, attempting to prove, to corroborate the teaching that one has heard, by living according to the findings that are offered to us. And we can do that in quite simple ways, as for instance with the exercise of control over thought. We can make a difference to our own lives. There is one important difference between the sciences that we know in the world and occult science, and that is that whereas our sciences depend on refined apparatus for further exploration, occult science depends on the evolution of faculties within the individual until he comes to know for himself.
Science, I think, will more and more become the ally of the ancient wisdom, because essentially science, philosophy, and religion must be concerned with the discovery of truth. And truth means not only facts about the universe, but also the deep meaning and purpose of the whole cosmic process. So HPB called the secret doctrine the synthesis of religion, science, and philosophy. In the past, religion, philosophy, and science were considered part of one discipline. I think in the future also they will merge together.
There has been time to look at only a few of the fascinating events and people associated with the Mahatmas and the Mahatma letters. While the authors of the Mahatma letters presented a wide range of subjects on the esoteric philosophy, it is important, perhaps, to consider what aspect of their teachings they deemed of greatest value to the serious student.
I think particularly of their emphasis on universal brotherhood. At least half a dozen times, if not more, they have directly referred to the fact that they wanted a universal brotherhood of humanity. The kind of universal brotherhood which brings about a basic change in the people who live that brotherhood. And the whole society was meant to show that all of humanity could come to that condition, inner condition of consciousness. Because universal brotherhood is not just a mental recognition that all people must have their rights. It's much more than that. It is an awakening to the unity of life of which they spoke.
Their chief concern is the welfare of humanity. And I feel that somehow the letters have brought me into a rapport with their aims, their understanding, their greater vision